My name is Natalie Morgan. I am 34 years old. The afternoon I walked into my parents' house holding a fresh severance package from my firm. My father did not ask why I was home early. He did not notice the pale look on my face. He was too busy dragging a roll of packing tape across a corrugated box filled with my winter coats. He did not pause when I stepped into the doorway. He just told me my younger sister needed my bedroom for her new home yoga studio. He said the natural light in my room was better for her brand. I stood frozen in the hallway holding a folder that said my income had just dropped to zero while staring at the plastic wastebasket by his feet. My framed master degree from Emory University was shoved inside face down in the trash. For 6 years I had quietly paid their property taxes, their premium cable, and my sister's car loan. But standing there, I realized my loyalty meant nothing the second they needed the square footage more than they needed me. What they did not know was that losing my job was not the end of my world. It was a technicality. Because I had just sold a private financial tech company for $4.2 million, and I had quietly purchased the distressed mortgage note to the very house my father was currently kicking me out of. But by the time they found out, the trap was already set. Before I take you back to that afternoon, I would appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to Elderly Stories. Tell me in the comments how old are you and where are you watching from. Now let me bring you back to that Tuesday in Marietta, Georgia. The air conditioning always ran cold in that split-level house. It was an expense my father never worried about because the autodraft pulled directly from my checking account on the first of every month. I walked through the front door expecting silence. Instead, the sharp screech of packing tape echoed from the top of the stairs. I carried a leather tote bag on my shoulder. Inside sat the termination documents my human resources manager had handed me just an hour prior. Corporate restructuring, they said. 6 years of 80-hour weeks erased in a 10-minute meeting. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel, dreading the moment I would have to break the news. I thought my family would offer a cup of coffee, a sympathetic word. I thought the crisis might bring us together. I climbed the carpeted steps and stopped at the threshold of my bedroom. My mattress was stripped to the bare pad. My books were swept off the shelves, piled haphazardly onto the floor. My father, Richard, stood in the center of the chaos. He was 62 years old, a man who measured his life by undisturbed routines. "Dad," I said. My voice came out flat. He snapped the tape from the roll and pressed it down with his thumb. He refused to meet my eyes. "Jessica needs the space, Natalie. She is launching that wellness channel next month. She needs a mirror wall, and the lighting in here is the only setup that works." I stared at him. He hoisted the heavy box onto his hip. "You are packing my room," I stated. "You are never home anyway," he replied, shifting his weight. "You live at the office. It makes zero sense for you to hold on to this room when your sister actually has a vision she is trying to build." He walked past me carrying 15 years of my belongings out into the hallway as if I were a tenant who had overstayed a lease. I looked back into the room. That was when I saw the trash can. My diploma. The walnut frame had cracked against a crushed soda can. I did not scream. I did not pull the layoff notice from my bag. The financial analyst inside my head simply assessed the ledger. The return on investment for my devotion was negative. They had not initiated a conversation or asked for my thoughts. They had unilaterally evicted me the moment 29-year-old Jessica demanded the space. The floorboards creaked behind me. Jessica walked up the stairs holding a metal tape measure. She wore crisp designer workout clothes. She tapped her manicured nails against the measuring tape, walking right past me without a greeting. "Are the bookshelves gone yet?" she asked our father. "I need to map out the corners before the contractor gets here tomorrow." I stood in the doorway of a room that was no longer mine, watching my family erase my existence from their daily lives. I zipped my tote bag closed. I decided right then to play the role they had written for me. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would be the broken, defeated daughter. I would let them push me out. Because the leverage I held in my pocket was worth far more than an argument. I turned my back on the room that used to hold my life and walked down the carpeted stairs. The smell of lemon polish hung heavy in the air. My mother, Susan, stood in the kitchen. She was 60 years old and maintained her country club aesthetic with a rigid discipline. She wore a tailored linen blouse, scrubbing an invisible spot on the granite island with a microfiber cloth. She treated this house like a museum exhibit, curating an image of upper-middle-class stability that had been quietly funded by my paycheck since I was 28. I set my leather tote bag on one of the bar stools. The leather slapped against the wood loud enough to make her glance up. "You are home early," she noted. Her tone held a slight edge of accusation. In her mind, my physical presence during business hours was an interruption of the natural order. My purpose was to be at a desk earning the capital that kept her garden manicured and her utility accounts out of collections. "I lost my job," I said. The words hovered in the sterile kitchen air. I delivered them without a tremor, watching her face to see what would break first. The maternal instinct or the financial panic. Susan stopped wiping the counter. The cloth went still beneath her palm. Her eyes darted from my face to my bag, and then to the window, as if the neighbors might somehow hear the failure radiating from our kitchen. She did not rush around the island to embrace me. She did not ask what happened, or if I was okay. Her face tightened into a mask of pure arithmetic. She was running the numbers. Before she could formulate a response that masked her calculation, the soft thud of expensive running shoes sounded on the hardwood. Jessica strolled into the kitchen, a green smoothie in one hand and her phone in the other. She had clearly caught the tail end of my sentence. "Wait," Jessica said, stopping near the refrigerator. "Are you serious? You got fired." "Laid off," I corrected softly. "The department was dissolved." Jessica lowered her phone. Her brow furrowed, but the confusion in her expression rapidly shifted into panic. It was not a shared panic for my livelihood. It was an insular, sharp fear for her own comfort. "But who is going to pay my car loan now?" Jessica asked. Her voice cracked with genuine distress. I looked at my younger sister. She stood there in $300 leggings, holding a beverage that cost more than a minimum wage hourly shift, demanding to know how a newly unemployed woman intended to finance her luxury vehicle. 6 years ago, Jessica had walked into a dealership and picked out a fully loaded SUV she had no business driving. Her credit score was a ghost town. Her income as a part-time social media manager could barely cover her brunch tabs. Susan had called me crying, begging me to co-sign the loan because Jessica needed safe transportation. I refused to co-sign. Instead, out of a misplaced sense of duty, I set up a direct transfer. $650 departed my account on the 14th of every month. 72 months, $46,800. All handed over so my sister could project an aura of success she never earned. That car loan was just the tip of the iceberg. The water running from the kitchen faucet right now was paid by my routing number. The high-speed internet router blinking in the den was under my name. I was the silent engine of the Morgan family. Now that the engine had stalled, they were not worried about the machine breaking. They were angry at the inconvenience. Susan finally found her voice. She folded the microfiber cloth into a neat square. "Well, Natalie, what is your plan? You cannot just sit around here. Your father and I are on a fixed budget. We cannot carry you." The audacity of the statement washed over me like ice water. Carry me. I had been carrying them on my back for the better part of a decade. I looked at the HR folder peeking out of my tote bag. A sudden crystalline clarity took root in my chest. If I pulled out my bank statements and demanded respect, they would fight me. They would argue. They would twist the narrative until I was the villain. But if I agreed with them, if I accepted the role of the defeated, burdensome daughter, they would show me exactly how deep their parasitism ran. "You are right," I said. My voice was a hollow whisper. "I do not have a plan yet." Susan sighed. It was a heavy theatrical sound designed to convey her immense burden. "You saw what your father is doing upstairs. Jessica really does need that space to get her business off the ground. She has momentum right now. We assumed you would just get an apartment in the city anyway. It makes more sense for your commute when you find a new position." She was rewriting history in real time. 10 minutes ago, my eviction was a sudden decree. Now it was a logical transition they had supposedly assumed I wanted. I will get my things, I said. I did not pack the boxes Richard was currently taping shut. I grabbed a duffel bag from the hall closet and stuffed it with a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and my toiletries. I left the rest of my 15 years in that house right there on the floor. Let them deal with the heavy lifting. Let them figure out what to do with the coats and the shoes and the broken diploma frame. I walked back downstairs. Jessica was already seated at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, sipping her smoothie. She did not look up. Susan was back to wiping the granite. I will send for the rest of my stuff eventually, I told them. Susan offered a tight, artificial smile. Take care of yourself, Natalie. Let us know when you land on your feet. I walked out the front door. The Georgia heat hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. It was suffocating, thick with humidity, but I breathed it in like mountain air. I crossed the driveway, the gravel crunching under my flats. I unlocked my sedan and slipped into the driver's seat. The leather burned against my legs, but I did not start the engine right away. I sat in the silent, sweltering cabin and looked back at the house. It was a beautiful property. Brick facade, impeccable landscaping, a 2-car garage housing Jessica's pristine SUV. From the street, it looked like the American dream. From the inside, it was a sinking ship, and I had just stepped off the deck. My hands rested on the steering wheel. A strange sensation fluttered in my stomach. It was not grief. It was not panic. It was anticipation. I had played the broke, defeated daughter perfectly. They genuinely believed I was driving away with nothing but the clothes in my duffel bag and a severed corporate lifeline. They thought I was ruined. They thought they had extracted every ounce of value from me and discarded the husk. The center console illuminated. My smartphone screen lit up the dim interior of the car. It was a push notification from the private banking app installed on my device. The interface was black and gold, a tier of banking reserved for high-net-worth clients. The notification was brief. It informed me that a wire transfer of $4.2 million had officially cleared the final escrow phase and settled into my holding account. The sale of my fintech startup was complete. I stared at the staggering string of numbers on the glass screen. The wealth I had built in the shadows was now fully liquid and entirely mine. But the notification was merely the prelude. Tomorrow I would check the status of my other quiet investment. The distressed mortgage note attached to the brick house sitting 20 yards away, the property my parents had just kicked me out of. I shifted the car into drive. The tires pulled away from the curb. They had no idea who they had just evicted, but they were going to find out. Interstate 75 South is a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Georgia pines. The afternoon traffic flowed steady as my sedan merged into the center lane. The digital speedometer climbed steadily. Every passing mile marker put more distance between my rear bumper and the brick residence in Marietta. The air conditioning blasted through the vents, cooling the lingering humidity from my skin. I did not turn on the radio. The silence inside the cabin was profound. It felt like the sudden release of a tightened spring. My family assumed my grueling schedule was dedicated solely to the financial firm that had just handed me a severance package. They believed my entire identity was wrapped up in climbing a corporate ladder for a mid-tier salary. They never bothered to ask what I actually did during those long evenings. For the past 4 years, I spent every night between 8 o'clock and 2 in the morning building an independent algorithmic trading platform. It started as a complex side project in my bedroom, a way to test predictive market models. By year 3, it gained serious traction. A venture capital group based out of Manhattan noticed the beta version. We began acquisition negotiations last winter. The corporate restructuring at my day job today was not a tragedy. It was a perfectly timed exit strategy. It provided the exact schedule freedom I needed to finalize the buyout transition. The push notification on my phone confirmed the reality: $4.2 million. The funds were clean settled and sitting in an untraceable holding account. The Atlanta skyline materialized in the distance, tall glass structures reflecting the late afternoon sun. As the city drew closer, the raw numbers of my past sacrifices washed over my mind. I possessed a mental spreadsheet detailing the exact cost of belonging to the Morgan family. The grand total hovered just over $160,000. It began with small requests when I was 28. A property tax supplement they could not quite cover. A replacement hot water heater before winter hit. Over time, those requests morphed into a permanent unspoken crutch. I paid the $8,000 invoice for a new central heating and cooling unit 2 summers ago. I maintained their premium lawn care subscription so the neighbors would never suspect financial strain. I subsidized the monthly country club dues so Susan could continue playing tennis with women whose husbands possessed actual wealth. I handed over $46,000 to keep Jessica driving a luxury SUV. My capital preserved their delicate illusions. I funded the stage, the props, and the costumes while they treated me like a stagehand. They paraded their affluent lifestyle while secretly drowning in a sea of red ink. 3 months ago, a trusted contact in the regional banking sector flagged a familiar address in a portfolio of distressed assets. My parents had fallen 4 months behind on their primary property loan. The original lending institution was actively preparing to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings. Richard never mentioned it. Susan kept hosting her elaborate garden club luncheons. They chose blind denial over fiscal responsibility, hoping a miracle would manifest to save their pride. I knew handing them a lump sum check to clear the arrears would only reinforce their parasitic habits. They would take my cash, thank their own good fortune, and continue spending recklessly on country club dinners and athletic wear. I chose a far more permanent route. I established Morgan Capital Holding Company. Working quietly through my legal counsel, I submitted a blind corporate bid to purchase their non-performing loan at a significant discount. The bank eagerly accepted the offer to offload the bad debt. The transfer of the deed instrument processed smoothly. I became the sole legal proprietor of their mortgage. I literally held the keys to their sanctuary. The irony of the afternoon played on a loop in my head. They had just evicted their own lender. My father had packed my belongings into cardboard boxes, complaining about my presence, entirely unaware he was insulting the only person standing between him and a public foreclosure auction. Jessica had demanded my bedroom to film internet videos in a house she possessed zero legal claim to occupy. My mother had told me she could not afford to carry a daughter on a fixed budget while standing under a roof I owned. A small, quiet smile touched my lips. The steering wheel felt remarkably light in my hands. I exited the interstate and navigated the surface streets of Buckhead. The transition from suburban Marietta to the affluent urban center marked the boundary line of my two lives. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of a high-rise condominium building. The gate lifted. I parked my sedan in a reserved spot next to a concrete pillar. I grabbed my duffel bag and rode the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors parted, revealing my actual life. A sleek cash-bought penthouse featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling cityscape. Hardwood floors, minimalist furniture, and a kitchen featuring imported marble counters. It was a space my family knew nothing about. I never invited them here. I knew if they saw the luxury I had earned, they would view it as a fresh reservoir to drain. I dropped my bag on the sofa and walked into my home office. The room was quiet, insulated from the city noise below. I needed to call my attorney to officially initiate the next phase of our strategy. The severance of my financial ties was step 1. The formal notification of the mortgage assignment was step 2. Before I could pick up my phone, the screen illuminated with an incoming call. It was David Bennett, my primary legal counsel. His timing was always impeccable. I swiped the screen to answer, expecting a routine update on the final escrow paperwork from the startup sale. "Good afternoon, David," I said, staring out the window at the setting sun. "The exit package is officially signed. My schedule is wide open. Congratulations, Natalie." His voice crackled through the speaker. He maintained a calm, measured cadence. I saw the final wire hit the holding account. "However, that is not why I am calling." I turned away from the window. "What is it?" "We ran the standard quarterly background sweep on your personal identifiers this morning," David explained. Just a routine check to ensure the new corporate structures remain shielded. We caught a concerning anomaly on your consumer credit report. My brow furrowed. I had no outstanding consumer debt. My credit score was immaculate, protected by strict privacy freezes. What kind of anomaly? An active revolving credit line, David replied. The account was opened roughly 8 months ago using your social security number. It is currently maxed out. I pulled a chair out from my desk and sat down. The quiet triumph of the drive faded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. How much is the balance? $14,000, David stated. I processed the number. $14,000 of stolen capital. Where is the billing address registered? There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of a page turning. The statements are being mailed to a residential address in Marietta, Georgia, David said. Your parents' house. I told David to send the encrypted file directly to my secure email server. He agreed, his tone shifting into the precise clinical cadence he used during hostile corporate takeovers. He advised me to review every single line item. Desperate people, he noted, rarely stop at just one unauthorized transaction. I ended the call and set the phone on the glass surface of my desk. The penthouse was entirely silent. Down below, the evening traffic of Buckhead painted streaks of red and white along the avenues. Up here, the air felt thin and sharp. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of sparkling water. The marble felt cool against my skin as I leaned against the counter. $14,000. My mind categorized the betrayal. Guilt tripping a family member into paying a utility bill was emotional manipulation. Skimming cash from a joint checking account was theft. But filling out a credit application using a stolen social security number and forging a digital signature was a federal crime. I carried the glass back to my office and opened my laptop. The encrypted email from David sat at the top of my inbox. I entered the decryption key and downloaded the document containing the detailed consumer credit report. My financial history unspooled across the screen. Everything was pristine. The high-yield savings accounts, the flawless mortgage history on the penthouse, the investment portfolios. Then I scrolled to the revolving credit section. There it was, a platinum-tier rewards card issued by a major national bank. The account had been opened 8 months prior. The primary cardholder was listed as Natalie Morgan. The billing address was the Brick House in Marietta. I clicked on the attached transaction history David had managed to pull through his banking contacts. The spreadsheet loaded, displaying hundreds of individual charges. I read the merchant names one by one. $300 at a boutique activewear store in an upscale suburban outdoor mall. $800 at a medical spa specializing in laser skin treatments. $400 at an organic juice bar and wellness clinic. A $1,200 charge for an online certification course in holistic yoga instruction. The charges painted a detailed, undeniable portrait of the thief. Richard did not care about designer leggings. Susan preferred the traditional country club aesthetic, not trendy wellness retreats. These were Jessica's haunts. These were the exact brands she tagged in her social media posts while pretending to be a successful, independent entrepreneur. My younger sister had built her digital persona using my stolen identity. Susan and Richard had to know. The physical statements were mailed to their address every single month. Susan sorted the mail with military precision. She knew exactly what envelopes arrived and whose names were printed on the front. They had aided and abetted the fraud, likely justifying it under the delusion that I made enough money to absorb the damage. A quiet sorrow washed over me for a fleeting moment. It was the final mourning period for the family I thought I possessed. I remembered teaching Jessica how to ride a bicycle in our old driveway. I remembered Susan baking cookies for my high school debate tournaments. I tried to reconcile those memories with the people who had just thrown my diploma in the trash and opened fraudulent accounts in my name. The math did not work. Those people were gone. Maybe they never existed at all. The sorrow evaporated, leaving behind a cold administrative warfare. I picked up my phone and dialed David again. He answered on the first ring. "Have you reviewed the merchant data?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "The charges are exclusively luxury wellness and boutique clothing. It is my sister." My parents are intercepting the mailed statements to hide the paper trail. David cleared his throat. I can draft the identity theft affidavit tonight. We need to file a formal police report to clear your liability for the $14,000 balance. Once the authorities initiate the investigation, the issuing bank will freeze the account and pursue criminal charges against whoever signed the application. I looked at the spreadsheet. I saw a pending charge from 2 days ago, a $60 transaction at a gourmet coffee roaster. They were still using it. They were actively spending stolen money while telling me they could not afford to carry me on their budget. No, I told David. Do not close the account. Do not file the affidavit. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David was a brilliant legal mind, but he was accustomed to clients who wanted to minimize their exposure immediately. Natalie, that is a live vulnerability. If we do not report the fraud promptly, the bank might hold you partially liable for the balance. I can afford $14,000, David. I cannot afford to lose this leverage. I explained the strategy. If we reported the fraud now, the bank would simply cancel the card. Jessica would receive a declined notification at a checkout counter. My parents would panic, realize I had discovered their secret, and they would immediately start spinning a web of lies. They would claim it was a misunderstanding. They would try to manipulate the narrative before I could corner them. I wanted the trap to snap shut on my own terms. The fraudulent credit card was no longer a liability. It was a loaded weapon sitting quietly in my arsenal. Combined with the distressed mortgage note I now owned, I possessed the power to dismantle their entire reality in a single afternoon. Leave the account open, I instructed him. Monitor the transactions, but do not flag it for fraud. I want them to feel secure. I want them to believe they won. When the time is right, we will present the evidence directly to them. David chuckled a low, dry sound. You are playing a very deep game here, Natalie. I will secure the transaction logs and prep a repayment demand letter to keep on standby. Let me know when you are ready to drop the hammer. I thanked him and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into a sea of artificial light. My penthouse felt like a fortress. I was untouchable up here. I had successfully insulated myself from their financial ruin. I possessed the legal documentation to prove their crimes. I held the deed to their shelter. I expected the next few days to be quiet. I assumed my family would revel in their newfound space, decorating my former bedroom with yoga mats and expensive ring lights bought with my credit line. I planned to use the silence to carefully orchestrate the delivery of the mortgage assignment notice. But I underestimated my mother. Susan was never content with a quiet victory. She required an audience. She needed validation. She needed to control the narrative of why her eldest daughter had suddenly vanished from the family home. My phone buzzed against the glass desk. It was not a text from my parents. It was a message from Aunt Diane, my father's older sister. Diane had always been the pragmatic outlier in the Morgan family tree. She saw through Susan's pretenses and rarely engaged in the neighborhood gossip. The preview banner on my locked screen displayed a simple, concerning text. Natalie, we need to talk. Your mother is posting things online. I unlocked the device and opened the message thread. Diane had sent 3 screenshots from a local country club social media group. I clicked on the first image. The administrative warfare I had just declared was about to spill over into the public square. My family was not just satisfied with kicking me out and stealing my money. They were actively preparing to destroy my reputation. I tapped the image file to enlarge the first screenshot on my phone. The familiar blue and white interface of the social media application glared against the ambient lighting of my office. It was a private neighborhood group, a digital enclave strictly moderated for the women of the Marietta Country Club. My mother treated this forum like her personal press briefing room. She curated her reality here, and right now her reality required a villain. The post was a masterclass in passive-aggressive victimhood. Susan had uploaded a photograph of Jessica painting the baseboards in my former bedroom. The caption read, "So proud of my youngest for chasing her dreams despite the negativity around her." It breaks a mother's heart when older siblings cannot handle not being the center of attention. We are focusing on healing and positive energy after Natalie decided to walk away from our family during a difficult financial season. Prayers appreciated. 38 comments trailed beneath the photograph. Women who had sipped imported wine on my parents' patio sitting on teak furniture I had purchased were now sending digital hugs and condemning my supposed jealousy. One comment from a woman named Barbara read, "It is so hard when the ones who lack ambition resent the ones who are building something real. Stay strong, Susan." I stared at the word ambition. I possessed the literal banking receipts of Jessica's ambition. Her entire brand was funded by a stolen social security number and $14,000 of fraudulent luxury spa charges. The certification course she needed to legally call herself an instructor was paid for by the credit line they opened in my name. The sheer audacity of calling me jealous of a crime I unwittingly financed was almost impressive. My phone vibrated in my palm, breaking my focus. Incoming call from Diane. I swiped the screen to answer. Diane was my father's older sister. She spent her career managing a high-volume dental practice in Roswell. She possessed a built-in lie detector that made her the black sheep of the Morgan clan. She refused to participate in the country club charades, which meant Susan actively despised her. "You saw it," Diane said. No greeting, just straight to the point. "I saw it," I replied, tracing the edge of my marble desk. "I am officially a jealous, bitter failure who abandoned her struggling relatives in their darkest hour." "It gets worse," Diane warned. Her voice carried the raspy cadence of a lifelong smoker who had quit a decade ago but kept the attitude. "Richard cornered Dave from across the street while taking out the recycling this morning. He told Dave they had to kick you out and cut you off financially because you refused to contribute to the household after losing your job. My father, a man whose mortgage was currently deeply delinquent and legally owned by his eldest daughter, was telling the neighborhood he had severed my allowance. The psychology behind the lie was transparent. He was preemptively controlling the narrative. If the bank foreclosed, he was setting the stage to blame the financial ruin on the sudden loss of my imaginary rent payments. It was a calculated defense mechanism designed to protect his fragile ego and preserve his masculine pride among his peers. "What did you say to them?" I asked. "Nothing yet," Diane scoffed. "I wanted to call you first. I can march over there right now and set the record straight. I know you paid that car note, Natalie. I know you floated their property taxes last fall. I will not sit here and let them ruin your name in this town." "No," I instructed. My voice was sharp and deliberate. "Do not say a word to anyone. I need you to play along." "Play along?" Diane repeated, her tone incredulous. "Natalie Susan is organizing a literal prayer circle for your supposed mental breakdown. She is telling everyone you stormed out because you were envious of Jessica's yoga business. She is mobilizing the entire neighborhood against you." "Let her pray," I countered. "Agree with Richard if he brings it up. Act concerned for them. Act disappointed in me. Do not defend my character to anyone." Diane paused. She was highly observant. She sensed the shift in my demeanor. "You have a plan. You always have a plan." "I do," I confirmed. "And it requires them to feel incredibly confident for a few more days. Let them spin their web. Let them lock themselves into this specific story. It will make the truth much harder for them to escape when the walls finally cave in." Diane chuckled softly, a dark, knowing sound. "All right, kiddo. I will play the concerned aunt. Just tell me you are safe." "I am better than safe," I promised her. "I will talk to you soon." I ended the call and tossed the device onto the sofa. The city lights of Atlanta sparkled outside my window, a million glowing testaments to industry and capital. My reputation back in the suburbs was being dismantled brick by brick. A younger version of me would have driven back up the interstate armed with bank statements, crying on the front lawn, begging the neighbors to believe the truth. I would have fought a public war of words against a woman who possessed decades of experience in suburban psychological operations. But the woman standing in the penthouse was a chief executive. Executives do not engage in petty skirmishes. We orchestrate structural collapses. The smear campaign was annoying. It was a pebble in my shoe. But it did not change the mathematical reality of the situation. I still held the deed to their property. I still possessed the fraud logs. Their neighborhood gossip was a paper shield against an approaching wrecking ball. I spent the next 48 hours finalizing the transition of my startup assets. The integration team from the venture capital firm required my signature on a dozen transfer protocols. I kept my personal phone on silent. I ignored 3 missed calls from unknown numbers, likely nosy country club associates, trying to pry into my downfall. The silence from my immediate family was deafening. They were waiting for me to crack. They expected a tearful apology tour. On Thursday evening, their patience expired. A text message arrived on my screen. The sender was Richard. It was not a question. It was not a check-in. It was a strict summons. Meet us at the Silver Diner on Sunday at noon. Do not be late. We need to discuss your obligations to this family and how you are going to fix the mess you made. Dress appropriately. I read the text twice. The sheer entitlement radiated from the digital font. He was commanding me to appear at a crowded public restaurant. The Silver Diner was a bustling establishment known for its chaotic Sunday brunch rush. Choosing that specific location was a classic intimidation tactic. Richard and Susan preferred public venues for conflicts because they knew I despised causing a scene. They assumed the presence of waitstaff and random patrons would force me into quiet submission. They planned to hand me a list of demands. Perhaps they had drafted an invoice for Jessica's mirror wall installation. Perhaps they wanted me to hand over whatever severance cash I possessed to buy back their affection. They wanted a public ambush. They wanted to strip away the last remnants of my dignity while drinking bottomless coffee in front of an audience. I tapped the reply field. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I could have sent a picture of the mortgage assignment. I could have sent a document displaying the police affidavit I had drafted for the credit card fraud. I could have ended the entire game right there in a text thread, shattering their reality from the comfort of my home office. Instead, I typed 3 words: I will be there. I locked the screen. The trap was officially primed. My father thought he was calling a meeting to discipline a wayward dependent child. He had no idea he had just scheduled an appointment with his primary creditor. Sunday was approaching, and I intended to walk into that diner and give them a reality check they would never forget. Sunday morning arrived with a humid, overcast sky. I stood inside my walk-in closet, bypassing the tailored designer suits and silk blouses. I needed a costume. To maintain the illusion of my sudden financial ruin, I selected a faded gray knit sweater and a pair of plain denim jeans from the back corner of a drawer. I tied my hair into a messy knot and wore 0 makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the exact version of the daughter they expected to meet. Defeated, tired, broken. I left my sedan parked in the Buckhead garage and ordered a standard ride-share service. Pulling up to the Silver Diner in a luxury vehicle would ruin the narrative. The driver dropped me off at the edge of the asphalt parking lot. The diner was a Marietta institution wrapped in chrome and neon, vibrating with the chaotic energy of the post-church Sunday brunch crowd. The scent of fried bacon and roasted coffee drifted through the double-glass doors. I navigated the crowded waiting area, scanning the vinyl booths lining the perimeter. I found them seated in a corner booth near the kitchen swing doors. Richard sat on the outside edge wearing a crisp golf polo. Susan sat across from him, her posture rigid, adorned in her usual pearls and a pastel cardigan. Jessica was tucked into the corner next to our mother, scrolling on her phone, wearing a pristine white track jacket that I had unknowingly paid for. They looked like a television advertisement for suburban success. I slid into the vinyl seat across from Jessica. None of them offered a greeting. Richard merely tapped his knuckles against the laminated tabletop. "You are late," he noted, glancing at his stainless steel wristwatch. "Traffic on the connector," I replied, keeping my tone submissive. A waitress appeared, placing plastic cups of ice water before us. She pulled a notepad from her apron. Richard ordered a steak and eggs platter. Susan requested a specialized egg white omelet. Jessica asked for a loaded waffle stack and a side of seasoned fries. The waitress turned to me. "Just a black coffee," I said. Susan sighed audibly. "Natalie, you need to eat. Starving yourself will not magically produce a new paycheck." I smiled weakly, staring at my ice water. I am fine. Really. As soon as the waitress walked away, Richard got straight to business. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He placed it onto the table and slid it across the formica surface using his index finger. The paper stopped right next to my water glass. "We drafted a budget," Richard announced. His voice carried the authoritative cadence of a project manager distributing tasks. "We know you are waiting on your unemployment checks to clear. When those funds deposit, this is the breakdown of your expected contributions to the household." I unfolded the paper. It was a printed spreadsheet. My mother had always possessed a talent for formatting. The columns listed various monthly expenses: the property tax escrow supplement, the premium internet package, a specific line item designated as Jessica vehicle maintenance. I read down the column maintaining a neutral expression. Then my eyes landed on the final row. National Bank Platinum Card minimum, $350. My pulse remained steady. I looked up from the paper. The diner hummed with the sound of clinking silverware and overlapping conversations. "What is this last item?" I asked softly. Susan adjusted her pearl necklace. Her gaze flickered toward the kitchen doors before meeting mine. "That is a shared household expense. We had some unexpected emergencies arise over the past few months. Things we needed to handle quickly to keep the family afloat. We expect you to carry that minimum balance until you secure a new position." I placed the paper flat on the table. I traced the printed letters of the bank name. "Household emergencies," I repeated. "Yes," Susan confirmed, her tone dripping with rehearsed sincerity. "The roof needed patching. We had to fix the sprinkler system. Routine maintenance." I shifted my gaze to my younger sister. Jessica was casually dipping a French fry into a pool of ketchup. She chewed slowly, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She did not look an ounce guilty. She looked like a spoiled child who had successfully manipulated the adults into punishing her older sibling. "I opened a credit report on Friday afternoon," I stated. The volume of my voice was low, designed to force them to lean in. "I noticed a platinum rewards card had been opened in my name 8 months ago." Richard stiffened. His hands dropped below the table. I also pulled the transaction history. I continued, my eyes locked on Susan. I did not see any charges for roof repairs or sprinkler systems. I saw a $1,200 charge for an online wellness certification. I saw weekly trips to the luxury medical spa on Main Street. I saw high-end activewear purchases. The color drained from Susan's cheeks. The country club facade cracked, revealing the panicked fraudster beneath. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. "You opened a credit line using my social security number," I said, looking at my father. "Both of you intercepted the mail to hide the statements. You let Jessica max out a $14,000 limit on spa treatments, and now you are handing me a printed spreadsheet demanding I use my unemployment benefits to pay the minimum balance." Susan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a frantic hiss. "Lower your voice, Natalie. You do not understand the pressure we are under. Jessica needed a boost to get her business started. You were making so much money at that firm. We knew you would barely notice a few $1,000s if we had to ask you to cover it eventually. It was a temporary bridge loan." "A bridge loan requires consent," I replied flatly. "What you did is a federal crime." Jessica swallowed her fry and rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Stop being dramatic. You are just bitter because my brand is actually taking off and you got fired from a boring desk job. Mom and Dad were just leveling the playing field. You always get everything." The profound lack of remorse sealed their fate. They were not victims of circumstance, they were willing parasites who felt entirely justified in their theft. "So," Richard said. His voice was hard, defensive. "What are you going to do about it? You are sitting here with no job and no prospects. You are going to pay the minimums, Natalie, because if you do not, your pristine credit score tanks. We all know how much you care about your precious numbers." He thought he had me trapped in a logical paradox. He believed the threat of ruining my own financial reputation would force me into compliance. He did not realize my reputation was already shielded, and his threat was aimed at a ghost. "No," I said. The single syllable hung in the air. Richard blinked. Excuse me. I am not paying a single dime on this spreadsheet, I declared, pushing the paper back across the table. I am not paying the fraudulent minimum. I am not paying the internet bill. I am not paying for the car sitting in the driveway. The arrangement is over. Richard's face flushed a deep, volatile crimson. The polite suburban father vanished, replaced by a man cornered by his own inadequacies. He realized his primary revenue stream was actively drying up in front of him. He slammed his hand onto the table. The water glasses rattled. A few heads turned from the adjacent booths. "You selfish, ungrateful brat," Richard barked, abandoning any pretense of volume control. "We put a roof over your head for decades. We fed you. We clothed you. And the second this family asks for a little help, you turn your back on us." The waitress arrived holding a large oval tray filled with their heavy brunch orders. She froze a few feet away, unsure if she should approach the screaming man. "You walk out that door, you are done!" Richard shouted, pointing a thick finger at my face. "You are cut off. Do not call us when you are starving. You were never really a Morgan anyway. You never cared about anyone but yourself." He played his final card. Public disownment. He expected the shame of the spectacle to break me. He expected me to shrink, to apologize, to agree to his terms, just to make the yelling stop. I looked at the three of them. My mother looking around nervously at the witnesses. My sister smirking at her plate. My father red-faced and seething. I stood up from the vinyl booth. I reached into my denim pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I dropped the currency onto the laminated table right on top of their printed spreadsheet. "That covers my black coffee," I said quietly. "Enjoy your brunch." I turned my back on them and walked down the central aisle of the diner. I felt the stares of the other patrons tracking my exit, but my spine remained perfectly straight. I pushed through the glass double doors and stepped back out into the humid Georgia air. I left them sitting there with a massive check for steaks and waffles they could not afford, clutching a spreadsheet that was now entirely worthless. They thought they had won the battle. They thought they had successfully exiled their burden. I pulled my phone from my pocket and ordered my rideshare back to Buckhead. As I waited on the curb, I logged into my secure banking portal. The diner confrontation had provided all the closure I required. It was time to initiate the digital severance, the manual cancellation of every single financial lifeline keeping the Morgan family afloat. By tomorrow morning, their entire world was going to stop spinning. The rideshare dropped me at the entrance of my building, just as the afternoon rain began to fall against the pavement. I walked through the sliding glass lobby doors, trading the humid Georgia heat for the climate-controlled crispness of the high-rise. The concierge offered a polite nod. I returned the gesture and stepped into the private elevator. The stainless steel doors slid shut, sealing away the noise of the city, the memory of the crowded diner, and the echoing shouts of my father. I rode up to the penthouse in total silence. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation at the restaurant was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp, cold focus. Richard thought he had delivered the final blow. He thought his public declaration of my exile was the ultimate punishment. He had no concept of the machinery he had just set into motion. I unlocked my front door and stepped onto the hardwood floor of my foyer. The apartment was still. It smelled like cedar and expensive candles. It was a sanctuary funded entirely by my own labor, insulated from the chaos of the Morgan family dynamic. I hung my gray knit sweater on a hook in the hall closet. I walked straight into my home office and sat down at the marble desk. I did not shed a single tear. The mourning period for my family had expired the moment I found my master's degree in the trash can. Now I was just an executive executing a hostile divestment. I opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a pale glow across the dark surface of the desk. I navigated to my primary banking portal and entered my multi-factor authentication credentials. The interface loaded, displaying the robust figures of my liquid assets. I bypassed the main summary page and clicked directly into the Scheduled Transfers tab. This specific page was a digital monument to my decade of servitude. It was a list of leeches attached to my routing number. I rested my hand on the wireless mouse and took a slow, deep breath. The first item on the ledger was the utility bundle for the Marietta residence. electricity, water, natural gas, and the premium fiber optic internet package. I highlighted the recurring draft. The bank software prompted a confirmation window asking if I was certain I wanted to permanently sever the connection to these external accounts. I clicked confirm. The line item vanished from the screen. By the end of the current billing cycle, the lights in Jessica's new yoga studio would go dark unless Richard found a way to cover the balance. The second item was a monthly draft payable to the Marietta Country Club. $450. This was not a utility. This was Susan's social armor. That monthly payment allowed my mother to sip Chardonnay on the terrace, play mixed doubles on the pristine clay courts, and look down her nose at women who shopped at discount grocery stores. It was the entry fee to her alternate reality. I hovered the cursor over the termination icon. I thought about the spreadsheet she had slid across the diner table demanding I use unemployment checks to fund her lifestyle. I clicked delete, the transaction disappeared. Her social shield was officially shattered. The final significant item on the list was the auto lender. $650 scheduled to depart my account on the 14th of every single month for the next 2 years. This was Jessica's Chariot, the pristine white luxury SUV she used as a prop for her wellness brand. She photographed her manicures against the leather steering wheel and recorded video updates while parked in upscale retail plazas. She believed she deserved the vehicle simply because she existed. I clicked the cancellation button. The bank software processed the request. The line item dissolved into the digital ether. I released the computer mouse. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and closed my eyes. A profound physiological shift occurred inside my chest. It was not a metaphor. It felt as though a literal sandbag had been lifted from my ribs. The phantom weight of carrying 3 capable adults had dictated my heart rate and my sleep schedule for 6 years. I had lived in a state of perpetual financial anxiety, always calculating if my quarterly bonuses would cover their inevitable emergencies. That anxiety evaporated. The money would stay in my account. The energy would stay in my mind. I breathed in, feeling my lungs expand fully for the first time in recent memory. The silence of the penthouse was no longer just quiet, it was liberating. I opened my eyes and picked up my smartphone. The defensive perimeter was dismantled. It was time to launch the offensive strike. I dialed David Bennett. He answered on the second ring. "Good afternoon, Natalie," he said. His voice was crisp, lacking any weekend lethargy. "How was the brunch meeting with your relatives?" "Enlightening," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the rain sweeping across the Atlanta skyline. Richard officially disowned me in front of the waitstaff. He ordered me to never contact them again unless I was prepared to beg for forgiveness and pay their fraudulent credit card minimums. David let out a low whistle. "Well, he certainly has a flair for the dramatic. I assume this means the grace period is officially over." "The grace period never existed," I corrected. "I just logged into my portal and canceled every recurring auto draft tied to their household. The utilities, the country club, and the car loan. The financial severance is complete." "Understood," David said, the tone of his voice shifting into attorney mode. "If you canceled the auto draft for your sister's vehicle, you should know those subprime auto lenders do not waste time. If she misses her payment window this week, they will issue a repossession order almost immediately. They track those luxury models via GPS. "Let them track it," I said. "She can learn to ride the municipal bus." I stood up and paced the length of my office. My bare feet patted softly against the hardwood. "David, I am ready for the next phase. Send the letter." I heard the sound of a keyboard clicking on his end of the line. The formal notice of assignment regarding the mortgage on the Marietta property, he verified. "Yes," I confirmed. "Execute the transfer protocol." David stopped typing. "I have the documents drafted and notarized. Under state real estate law, we are required to inform the debtors that their deed of trust has been legally reassigned to a new lien holder. I will print the notice on my firm's official letterhead." The document clearly states that Morgan Capital Holding Company is the new proprietor of the loan and that all future correspondence and arrears must be directed to us. "Make sure my name is listed as the primary managing director of the LLC," I instructed. "I do not want them guessing who is behind the corporate veil." I want Richard to read my name in black and white. It is featured prominently on the second page, David assured me. I will dispatch the envelope via the postal service tomorrow morning. It will be sent via certified mail with a return receipt requested. Your father will have to physically sign the green card on his front porch to accept the delivery. We will have a legal record of the exact minute he receives the news. How long is the transit time from your downtown office to the suburbs, I asked. 3 business days maximum, David replied. Assuming the carrier attempts delivery on the first pass, the document will arrive on his doorstep by Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning at the latest. I stopped pacing and looked down at the street below. The cars were tiny metallic dots navigating the wet pavement. Send it tomorrow, I said, and prepare the secondary demand letter for the credit card fraud. Have it ready on your desk. Once Richard realizes I own the roof over his head, he is going to panic. I want to have our countermeasure locked and loaded when they inevitably try to retaliate. Consider it done, Natalie. Enjoy your Sunday evening. You earned some peace and quiet. I ended the call and placed the phone on the desk. The digital severance was the silent pulling of a pin. The certified letter was the grenade lobbed over the suburban fence. A ticking clock had just started echoing in the background of my life, counting down the hours until the financial reality crashed down upon the brick house in Marietta. Richard and Susan were currently sitting in their living room, digesting their steaks, basking in the false glory of having put their ungrateful daughter in her place. Jessica was likely recording a video in my former bedroom, showing off her new athleisure wear to her digital followers. They felt powerful. They felt untouchable. They did not know that a tow truck dispatcher was about to receive a ping regarding a delinquent luxury SUV. They did not know that the country club accounting office was about to flag a rejected payment. And they certainly did not know that a postal carrier was about to hand them a clipboard that would legally strip away their sanctuary. I walked into the kitchen and opened a bottle of sparkling water. The storm clouds outside were breaking, revealing a sliver of twilight on the horizon. The waiting game had begun. I did not have to lift another finger. I just had to watch the dominoes fall. The silence of a corporate boardroom is a predictable commodity. In my 6 years as a financial analyst, I learned that silence usually meant the numbers were doing exactly what they were programmed to do. Numbers do not scream, they do not experience emotional breakdowns, and they never try to manipulate you using high school memories. They simply occupy space on a ledger waiting for the inevitable outcome of their equations. By Friday afternoon, 5 days after the disaster at the Silver Diner, the math of my family's reality finally caught up with them. I was standing in this kitchen of my Buckhead penthouse, watching the espresso machine drip dark liquid into a white porcelain cup. The sky outside was a brilliant cloudless blue, the kind of clear Georgia morning that makes you forget the suffocating humidity waiting on the pavement below. I picked up my phone to check my morning calendar, but the device began to vibrate in my hand. It was a voicemail alert. The caller identification field was blank, but the prefix was a familiar Marietta exchange. I tapped the play icon, setting the phone on the kitchen counter. The audio quality was chaotic, filled with the rushing sound of wind, the distant slam of a car door, and a high-pitched hysterical screech that I recognized instantly. "Natalie, you absolute psycho!" Jessica screamed into the microphone. Her voice was trembling with a volatile mixture of rage and profound public humiliation. "You did this. I know you did this. You canceled the bank draft on purpose. They just took my car. They literally hooked it up to a flatbed and dragged it out of the driveway right in front of everyone." I took a slow sip of my espresso, leaning against the marble counter. The background audio of the voicemail revealed the faint chatter of several women. Jessica had been hosting a brunch for her new country club associates, trying to network for her imaginary wellness brand. She had been pouring mimosas and distributing organic juice samples on the patio, while a subprime auto lender's recovery agent quietly backed a heavy-duty tow truck down the gravel driveway. The image was cinematic. The GPS tracker embedded in the luxury sport utility vehicle had directed the repo man straight to the target coordinates. He did not care about her designer track jackets or her online followers. He merely verified the delinquent status of the account, snapped the steel chains around the axle, and drove away, leaving a trail of exhaust smoke and broken illusions. "You ruined my life!" Jessica shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her shattered ego. I am supposed to film a sponsored content sequence at the Botanical Gardens in 2 hours. How am I supposed to get there? Walk. You call me back right now and fix this, you selfish failure. The audio clicked off. I did not pick up the phone. I did not type a response. The financial analyst inside me simply checked the calendar. The 14th of the month had passed 48 hours ago. The lending institution had waited exactly 2 days before executing the repossession protocol. Subprime auto financiers in modern America do not engage in lengthy negotiations. They secure their assets the moment the capital stops flowing. 10 minutes later, the screen illuminated again. This time, the display indicated an incoming call from Susan. I declined the call, letting the system route her directly to the digital archive. I knew exactly what narrative she was preparing to deploy. The aggressive defensive posture Richard had assumed at the diner would be replaced by Susan's preferred weapon, sickly sweet maternal manipulation. A moment later, a second voicemail notification materialized. I tapped the speaker icon. "Natalie, sweetie!" My mother's voice dripped with artificial warmth, though I could hear the tight, anxious strain underneath her words. "We are all just so stressed out right now. Jessica is completely inconsolable in her room. There has been a terrible misunderstanding with the bank. The collection agency said there is a $1,500 recovery fee to release the vehicle and clear the administrative hold. I know things were tense at the diner, honey, but we are family. We need to stick together during these little bumps in the road. Could you just wire the $1,500 to the lender today? Just this once, Natalie. For your sister. Let us put the past behind us." I watched the digital audio waves flatten on the screen as the recording ended. Just this once. It was the exact phrase she had used when she convinced me to float their property tax supplement and when she begged me to cover the heating unit repair bills. It was the mantra of the chronic parasite, an endless sequence of just this once requests that totaled over $160,000. I selected both audio files and shifted them into a hidden archive folder labeled Evidence. My absolute silence was the one variable they had never factored into their survival strategy. They were accustomed to my immediate compliance. They expected me to break under the pressure of their tears or their anger rushing to my banking portal to clear the balance just to restore a false sense of peace. By refusing to engage, I was denying them the emotional oxygen they required to sustain their delusions. The silence from my end drove the Marietta household into a state of absolute paranoid frenzy. Aunt Diane texted me an hour later confirming the psychological fallout. Susan was pacing the living room floor, frantically calling every country club associate to borrow the recovery cash, but her recent social media posts about our family trouble had made her radioactive. Nobody wanted to lend money to a woman whose household was actively fractured. Dave from across the street had reportedly watched Richard standing in the front yard staring down at the empty driveway where the luxury vehicle used to sit, his shoulders hunched, his masculine pride utterly dismantled in full view of the neighbors. They were beginning to realize that the ungrateful daughter they had publicly disowned at the diner was not coming back to save them. The safety net had been pulled away, and they were free falling through the realities of their own financial neglect. I closed my laptop and walked out onto my balcony. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a jagged line of silver and glass piercing the warm morning air. I felt completely detached from the drama unfolding 30 miles to the north. I was a spectator watching a controlled demolition. The loss of the luxury vehicle was the first significant crack in the foundation they had built on my back. It was a minor conflict, a mere pebble compared to the structural blast that was currently traveling through the United States postal system. David Bennett's certified envelope was scheduled for delivery today. Even as my mother was weeping over a repossessed car, a postal carrier was climbing the concrete steps of their split-level house, carrying a document that would legally reclassify their entire existence. My smartphone buzzed one final time in my palm. It was a delivery tracking alert from the courier service. The status icon shifted from in transit to out for delivery. The countdown was officially entering its final minutes. The family was trapped in a room of their own making, frantically trying to fix a broken window, completely oblivious to the fact that I had already bought the entire building. The tracking application on my smartphone refreshed with a subtle chime. The blue transit bar shifted to a solid green checkmark. Delivery confirmed. A digital signature belonging to Richard Morgan was now logged in the Federal Postal Database. The trap I had meticulously engineered over the past 3 months was no longer a theoretical construct. It was a physical document resting in my father's hands. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the mid-morning traffic crawl along the Atlanta avenues below. I did not need to be in Marietta to witness the fallout. The beauty of a perfectly executed financial maneuver is its predictability. I knew exactly how long it would take for the legal jargon to penetrate his ego. I gave it 20 minutes. My phone rang 19 minutes later. The caller ID displayed Aunt Diane. I swiped the screen to answer, placing the device on speaker mode while I poured a glass of cold mineral water. "Are you sitting down?" Diane asked. Her voice lacked its usual raspy amusement. She sounded breathless, as if she had just watched a multi-car collision unfold on the highway. "I am standing," I replied, leaning against the edge of my marble desk. "Tell me everything." "He called me 5 minutes ago," Diane began, her words rushing out in a chaotic torrent. "Natalie, I have known my brother for 6 decades. I have seen him angry. I have seen him depressed. But I have never heard him sound like a hollow shell of a man. He could barely form a coherent sentence." I took a slow sip of my water. "Walk me through it." According to Diane, the morning at the brick split-level house had been a grim affair. Jessica was locked inside my former bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone, mourning the public seizure of her luxury sport utility vehicle. Susan was pacing the living room rug, clutching a cold cup of coffee, paralyzed by the sudden evaporation of her country club status. Richard had retreated to the front porch. He was standing on the concrete steps, staring at the fresh oil stains on the driveway where the repossessed chariot used to sit. He was a man watching his carefully curated suburban kingdom crumble piece by piece. When the mail carrier pulled up to the curb, Richard walked down the driveway to retrieve the daily stack of envelopes. He expected a collection notice from the auto lender. He expected past due utility invoices. The carrier handed him an electronic clipboard and a thick, rigid envelope sent via certified courier. Richard signed his name, annoyed by the administrative inconvenience. He carried the parcel into the kitchen. He ignored Susan, who was quietly weeping over a stack of unpaid invoices on the kitchen island. Richard procured a brass letter opener and sliced through the heavy linen paper. The return address belonged to David Bennett and Associates, a premium downtown legal firm. Richard extracted the stark white pages. The bold black font at the top of the first page read, "Formal Notice of Assignment of Deed of Trust." Diane recounted how Richard read the first paragraph over the phone to her, his voice trembling with confusion. The document outlined that his original banking institution had elected to divest his deeply delinquent property loan. The distressed asset had been legally acquired by a private holding entity. "He told me the new creditor was named Morgan Capital LLC. Diane said, her tone laced with disbelief. "He actually thought it was a bizarre coincidence. He thought some faceless corporate conglomerate sharing our surname had purchased his debt. He told me he planned to call them and negotiate a payment plan based on his fixed income." I smiled into the empty penthouse. The arrogance of the man was a structural flaw. What happened when he turned the page? "He read the signature block," Diane answered. I pictured the scene vividly. Richard standing in the kitchen, he thought he controlled flipping the heavy linen paper over to find the contact information for his new financial overlord. His eyes scanning the ink, searching for a corporate liaison, finding instead a name he knew intimately, Natalie Morgan, sole proprietor and managing director. Diane said the silence on the telephone line was terrifying. Richard stopped breathing. He dropped the legal documents onto the granite countertop as if the paper had physically burned his fingers. Susan asked him what was wrong, but he could not articulate a response. The cognitive dissonance was simply too vast for his brain to process. The man who dictated every family dynamic, who demanded respect without ever earning it, who treated his eldest child like an endless ATM machine, was suddenly reduced to a tenant living under the mercy of the daughter he had just exiled. "He started doing the math out loud," Diane continued, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He knows how real estate portfolios work, Natalie. He realized that purchasing a non-performing loan out of a bank catalog requires immense liquid cash reserves. The realization hit him like a freight train. He understood that you were never waiting on unemployment checks. You possess staggering hidden wealth. The foundation of his ego shattered into a million irreparable fragments. He remembered standing in my childhood bedroom, taping up a cardboard box filled with my winter coats, telling me I was useless because I lived at the office. He remembered the showdown at the Silver Diner, slamming his fist onto the laminated table, ordering me to pay a fraudulent credit card minimum, loudly declaring I was cut off and never truly a part of his bloodline. He had aggressively discarded his own landlord. What is his current status? I asked, my voice devoid of any sympathy. Panic, Diane confirmed. Pure, unadulterated panic. Susan picked up the papers after he dropped them. When she saw your name, she started screaming. She thought you forged the documents. Richard had to explain to her that premium downtown law firms do not mail forged deeds of trust. The reality is sinking in. They no longer own their home. You do. I set my water glass down. I felt the profound physical satisfaction of a ledger balancing perfectly to zero. The scales of justice had been realigned. The debt they owed me for 6 years of exploitation could never be repaid in currency, but acquiring the deed to their sanctuary was a highly acceptable alternative. Diane cleared her throat, interrupting my quiet victory. Natalie, you need to listen to me carefully. The shock is wearing off and the desperation is setting in. Richard is currently tearing the house apart looking for his keys. He told Susan to put on her shoes. Where are they going? I asked, though I already anticipated the answer. They ran the registration address for Morgan Capital LLC through an internet search engine, Diane warned. They know it tracks back to a high-rise building in Buckhead. They think you are renting a small apartment in the city. They are mobilizing right now. Richard intends to drive down there and confront you face to face. He thinks he can bully you into surrendering the paperwork. I looked around my luxurious, sprawling penthouse. The imported marble counters, the custom artwork, the floor-to-ceiling glass showcasing the skyline. They expected to find a frightened girl hiding in a cramped studio. They were walking into a fortress they could not possibly comprehend. Let them come, I told Diane softly. Are you sure? She asked, genuine concern threading through her words. Richard is unpredictable when his pride is wounded. I have security protocols in place, I assured her. I am not the same woman who stood in that hallway holding a cardboard box. Thank you for the intelligence, Diane. I will handle them from here. I terminated the call. The board was set. The pieces were moving across the map exactly as I had modeled. The minor skirmishes were over. The main engagement was pulling onto Interstate 75 heading south toward my territory. I walked over to the intercom panel mounted on the wall near my front entrance. I pressed the button connecting me directly to the ground floor concierge desk. A polite professional voice greeted me instantly. Good morning, Ms. Morgan. How may I assist you today? I am expecting 3 hostile visitors within the hour, I stated calmly. They will likely demand entry and claim to be my relatives. Under no circumstances are they permitted past the lobby desk. I understand completely, the concierge replied, his tone shifting into a serious protective register. We will intercept them at the front doors. I stepped away from the panel. I smoothed the fabric of my tailored trousers and walked back toward the windows. The ticking clock had stopped. The alarm was ringing. The Morgan family was about to breach the perimeter of my new reality, and they were entirely unprepared for the altitude. The tablet resting on my marble desktop provided a pristine, high-definition view of the ground floor. My building utilized a state-of-the-art surveillance system, allowing residents to monitor the lobby, the valet station, and the pedestrian entrances. I tapped the screen, expanding the camera feed covering the circular driveway. 45 minutes had passed since my conversation with Aunt Diane. The drive from Marietta to Buckhead typically required an hour, but Richard drove with the reckless urgency of a man watching his kingdom dissolve. A silver sedan swerved into the designated loading zone, bypassing the valet attendants entirely. It was my father's car. The front bumper stopped inches from a concrete planter. The driver's side door flew open and Richard emerged. He wore the same golf polo from the diner, but his demeanor lacked any of the confident arrogance he had projected over our brunch. His posture was stiff, his jaw rigid, driven by sheer panic. Susan climbed out of the passenger seat, clutching a designer handbag against her chest like a shield. Jessica emerged from the rear, dragging her feet, her expression sour. She was forced to ride in the back seat of her parents' vehicle, a harsh demotion from her luxury chariot. They grouped together on the pavement, staring up at the structure looming above them. I watched their body language shift in real time. They had typed the registration address of Morgan Capital Holding Company into their navigation application, assuming it would lead them to a modest commercial park or a generic apartment complex. They anticipated finding a space where they could exert their typical dominance. Instead, they were standing at the base of a 50-story architectural marvel. The exterior featured sweeping curves of reflective glass and brushed steel. The valet station was populated by exotic sports cars and chauffeur-driven town cars. It was an environment of unapologetic wealth, an ecosystem where their suburban country club status held zero currency. Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to project authority, and marched toward the sliding glass doors. Susan and Jessica followed closely, their eyes darting nervously around the opulent surroundings. The lobby camera captured their entrance. The interior of the building was designed to impress and intimidate. Imported Italian marble stretched across the floor, reflecting the warm glow of custom chandeliers. To reach the residential elevators, visitors had to bypass a formidable security desk constructed from dark mahogany manned by highly trained personnel. Marcus, the head concierge, stood behind the desk. He wore an immaculate tailored suit, a discreet earpiece resting in his right ear. He handled professional athletes, corporate executives, and minor celebrities on a daily basis. A disgruntled family from the suburbs barely registered on his radar. Richard approached the mahogany barrier, leaning forward and placing his hands flat on the surface. I could not hear the audio through the standard camera feed, but the visual cues were unmistakable. My father was speaking rapidly, demanding attention. He gestured toward the elevator banks, pointing his finger with the same entitled fury he had utilized at the diner. Marcus maintained a neutral, pleasant expression. He raised one hand, a polite gesture signaling Richard to pause, and shook his head gently. The concierge was explaining the strict access protocols. Nobody proceeded past the desk without explicit authorization from a resident. The rejection hit Richard hard. His face flushed. He leaned closer, invading the personal space of the desk, pointing a finger directly at Marcus. He was undoubtedly deploying his standard paternal narrative, claiming he was my father and asserting his imaginary right to bypass the rules. Susan stepped forward, placing a hand on Richard's arm, attempting to deploy her diplomatic smile. She likely tried to charm the concierge, using her practiced hostess voice to smooth over the friction. But Marcus was immune to suburban pleasantries. He was a professional gatekeeper, paid to enforce boundaries. He simply shook his head again, gesturing toward the exit. The situation began to escalate. Jessica pulled out her smartphone, holding it up as if she intended to record the interaction, threatening to leverage her meager social media following against the building staff. It was a pathetic, empty gesture. Richard slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk. The sudden movement caught the attention of two uniformed security guards stationed near the perimeter. They stepped forward, their presence immediately changing the dynamic. These were not elderly night watchmen. They were physically imposing individuals trained to mitigate hostile threats. They flanked my father, establishing a firm physical barrier between him and the elevators. My office intercom buzzed. The sharp sound broke the quiet atmosphere of the penthouse. I walked over to the wall panel and pressed the receiver button. Yes, Marcus. Good morning again, Ms. Morgan. The concierge spoke, his voice carrying the calm, steady cadence of a seasoned professional. I apologize for the intrusion. I currently have 3 individuals in the lobby demanding access to your residence. The older gentleman claims to be your father, Richard. He is becoming quite agitated. I kept my eyes on the tablet screen. The security feed showed Richard arguing with the guards, his face a mask of furious desperation. They are not authorized guests, I stated clearly. Understood, Marcus replied. Would you like me to have security escort them off the premises immediately? I considered the option. Having them physically removed would deliver a satisfying blow to their egos, but it lacked the precise administrative coldness I intended to project. I wanted them to leave on their own accord, carrying the full weight of their newly discovered insignificance. No, I instructed, do not touch them unless they become a danger to the staff. I want you to deliver a specific message to the gentleman. Tell him I am unavailable today. Inform him that if he wishes to discuss the assigned deed of trust, he must schedule an appointment with my legal counsel, David Bennett, for Monday morning at his downtown office. Provide him with the firm's contact number. I will relay the message precisely, Marcus assured me. Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate your discretion. I released the intercom button and returned my attention to the tablet. On the screen, Marcus leaned forward and spoke directly to Richard. The change in my father's demeanor was instantaneous. The blustering anger drained from his features, replaced by a hollow, defeated realization. He took a physical step backward, creating space between himself and the mahogany desk. Marcus reached for a customized notepad, jotted down the attorney's information, and slid the paper across the counter. Richard stared at the slip of paper. He did not snatch it. He did not yell. He slowly reached out and picked it up, folding it carefully before sliding it into his pocket. He turned to look at Susan and Jessica. They were watching him, waiting for his instruction, waiting for the patriarch to assert dominance and solve the crisis. He had nothing to offer them. He had driven 30 miles, fueled by the belief that he could simply shout his way back into a position of authority. He thought he could bully the daughter he raised into surrendering a multi-$100,000 legal document. Instead, he was stopped by a locked door he could not force open, guarded by men he could not intimidate in a building he could never afford to enter. The architectural grandeur of the lobby dwarfed them. The marble floors, the towering ceilings, the quiet efficiency of the staff. Every detail reinforced the profound shift in our power dynamics. I was no longer the obedient child living under their roof. I was the sovereign owner of the ground beneath their feet, operating from an altitude they could not reach. Richard lowered his head. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the sliding glass exit doors. Susan hurried after him, her designer handbag clutched tightly, her posture shrinking under the gaze of the security personnel. Jessica followed last, casting one final resentful glance toward the elevator banks before stepping out into the humid Georgia air. They retreated to their illegally parked sedan. Richard climbed behind the wheel, staring blankly through the windshield for several moments before shifting the transmission into gear. The silver car pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy Buckhead traffic, disappearing from the camera feed. I locked the tablet screen and set it down. The siege on the penthouse had lasted less than 7 minutes. It ended without a single raised voice reaching my ears. The boundary held firm, tested, and proven resilient. The satisfaction flowing through my veins was crisp and pure. I had not engaged in a screaming match. I had not justified my actions. I simply allowed the structure of my success to deflect their frantic entitlement. However, the war was not over. Deflecting their impromptu visit merely delayed the inevitable confrontation. Richard now held a piece of paper directing him to David Bennett's law firm. He was trapped in a financial corner, facing the very real prospect of losing his home. Desperation breeds unpredictable behavior, and my father was a man who preferred to attack rather than surrender. He would call the number. He would schedule the meeting. He would march into that downtown conference room on Monday morning, bringing Susan and Jessica with him, determined to regain control of the narrative. They would arrive armed with guilt, familial obligations, and whatever twisted justifications they could muster. They believed the mortgage assignment was the extent of my leverage. They thought the battle would center entirely on the property deed. They had no idea about the second trap resting quietly in David's desk drawer. The fraudulent credit card statements, the luxury merchant logs, the identity theft affidavit ready for submission to the federal authorities. I walked into my bedroom and opened my expansive closet. I bypassed the faded gray sweater and the plain denim jeans I had worn to the diner. I pulled a tailored charcoal designer suit from its hanger, selecting a crisp silk blouse to match. Tomorrow morning, I would not play the role of the defeated daughter. I would arrive as the chief executive ready to execute the final devastating maneuver. The snare was set, and they were walking right into it. The elevator banks inside the downtown legal district ascend with a silent, swift efficiency. I stood alone in the polished steel cabin, watching the digital floor indicator climb toward the 42nd story. Monday morning sunlight pierced through the glass lobby below, casting long shadows across the pavement. I wore a tailored charcoal designer suit paired with a crisp ivory silk blouse. The outfit was deliberate. It was the armor of a chief executive officer. The faded gray knit sweater from our diner encounter was currently folded in the back of my closet, its purpose fulfilled. The elevator chimes resonated softly as the doors parted. I stepped onto the plush carpet of David Bennett and Associates. The reception area smelled of rich espresso and expensive leather. A receptionist greeted me by name and gestured toward the primary boardroom located at the end of the corridor. I walked down the hallway, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing off the glass partitions. Through the transparent walls of the main conference room, I saw them. My father, my mother, and my younger sister sat shoulder to shoulder on one side of a sprawling mahogany table. They looked miniature against the backdrop of the towering city skyline, visible through the wraparound windows. Richard wore a stiff business suit that appeared a decade out of date. Susan clutched a leather handbag tightly in her lap, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent space. Jessica sat slumped in her chair. Without her luxury sport utility vehicle and her unlimited spa budget, she wore a plain cotton hoodie projecting the sullen aura of a grounded teenager rather than a budding wellness entrepreneur. David Bennett sat near the head of the table, organizing a stack of pristine manila folders. He noticed my approach and stood up, projecting calm professional authority. I pushed open the heavy glass door and entered the room. The ambient chatter ceased. 3 heads turned simultaneously. I watched their eyes track my movement, taking in the designer suit, the immaculate presentation, and the unbothered posture. The visual impact was instantaneous. The broke, defeated daughter they had exiled from their split-level house was a phantom. The woman standing before them was a corporate entity. I did not offer a greeting. I walked directly to the head of the mahogany table and took my seat. Richard placed his hands flat on the polished wood. He attempted to channel the familiar, overbearing paternal energy he had utilized my entire life. He leaned forward, aiming a stern glare in my direction. "Stop this nonsense right now," Natalie Richard commanded. His voice echoed slightly in the large room. "We drove all the way down here to humor this stunt. You are going to call off whatever game you are playing with this holding company and return our property deed. You do not treat your blood relatives like hostile corporate targets." I raised my right-hand palm facing outward. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. "Do not speak again until I instruct you to do so," I said. My voice was level, devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "You are not in your kitchen. You are sitting in the offices of my legal counsel. You are here because you are deeply delinquent debtors, and I am your primary creditor." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but David intervened seamlessly. "I advise you to listen to my client, Mr. Morgan," David stated. His tone was chillingly polite. "The documents we are about to present are legally binding. Interrupting the proceedings will not alter your current liability." Richard snapped his jaw shut. A muscle feathered in his cheek, but he leaned back in his leather chair. The realization that he could not shout his way out of the boardroom settled over him like a heavy blanket. I reached across the table and pulled the first manila folder toward me. I opened the cover and extracted 3 identical bound packets, sliding one across the mahogany surface to each of my family members. "Open to the first tab," I instructed. Susan fumbled with the cover page, her hands trembling slightly. Jessica merely stared at the paper, refusing to touch it. Richard flipped the tab over his eyes, scanning the dense legal typography. "That is the formal deed of trust for the Marietta residents," I explained, watching their reactions. "As you read in the mailed notice, your original lending institution grew tired of your missed payments. 4 months of delinquency triggered an internal asset liquidation protocol." I formed Morgan Capital LLC and purchased your non-performing loan at a steep discount. I own the note. I own the title. You currently occupy my asset. This is unethical, Susan whispered, her gaze dropping to her lap. You cannot steal a house from your own parents. I did not steal anything. I corrected her smoothly. I executed a standard real estate transaction. You failed to honor your financial obligations to the bank. I simply intercepted the inevitable foreclosure. If I had not acquired the debt, you would be receiving eviction notices from a federal marshal by the end of the quarter. I gestured toward the second tab in their packets. Turn the page. Richard flipped the heavy paper. A complex spreadsheet filled the page, identical in format to the one Susan had handed me at the Silver Diner, but infinitely more devastating. That ledger details every single financial subsidy I have provided to this family over the past 6 years, I stated. The property taxes, the heating unit repairs, the lawn maintenance, the country club dues, the auto loan payments. The grand total is $162,400. I paused, letting the staggering numeric value echo in the quiet room. When you packed my belongings into cardboard boxes and told me I was useless, I realized you viewed me merely as a revenue stream, I continued. You assumed I was broken because I lost a mid-level analyst position. You never bothered to ask how I spent my evenings. I spent them building an algorithmic trading platform that I recently sold to a venture capital firm for $4.2 million. Susan gasped audibly. Her hand flew to her mouth. The sheer scale of the wealth I had concealed shattered her suburban comprehension. Richard turned pale, his eyes dropping back to the spreadsheet, unable to meet my gaze. The daughter he had publicly disowned was a self-made millionaire. Jessica finally reacted. She pushed the binder away, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. So what? Jessica sneered. You have millions of dollars sitting in a bank account and you still canceled my auto draft. You let them drag my car away in front of my friends. You are just a vindictive person, Natalie. You set me up to fail because you hate my brand. I looked at my younger sister. The delusion was profound. She sat in a room surrounded by the wreckage of her family finances, yet she remained solely focused on her own superficial inconvenience. I did not set you up to fail, I replied softly. I merely stopped funding your illusions. I turned to David. Hand them the final document. David retrieved a separate sealed envelope from his leather portfolio. He extracted 3 copies of a thick report and distributed them across the table. I watched Susan carefully. The moment she recognized the logo of the National Banking Institution on the header page, the last remnants of color drained from her face. She looked physically ill. Turn to page 4, I instructed. Richard leafed through the pages. His brow furrowed in confusion as he reviewed the columns of transaction logs. He read the merchant names out loud. Boutique activewear, laser skin treatments, organic juice bars, holistic certification courses. What is this? Richard asked, looking from the paper to my face. That is a consumer credit report, I answered. An active platinum rewards card was opened using my social security number 8 months ago. The billing address is your residence. The current balance is $14,000. Richard slowly turned his head toward his wife. Susan was staring at the mahogany table, refusing to look up. He then looked at his youngest daughter. Jessica shrank back into her chair, the defiant sneer vanishing instantly. You opened a line of credit in her name, Richard asked. His voice was a hollow, echoing whisper. He was a proud, arrogant man, but he was not a thief. The realization that his wife and favorite child had crossed the line into actual criminality broke the final pillar of his reality. Susan shook her head frantically. We needed a bridge loan, Richard. You know how tight the budget was. Jessica needed her certifications. Natalie has perfect credit. We were going to pay it back as soon as the wellness channel gained traction. You committed federal identity theft, David Bennett interjected. His voice cut through the room like a scalpel. You forged a digital signature and intercepted the monthly statements delivered by the Postal Service. That constitutes mail fraud. Jessica began to cry. It was not a calculated, manipulative performance. It was the raw, unfiltered terror of a spoiled adult, realizing the consequences of her actions. I am sorry, Jessica sobbed, wiping mascara from her cheeks. Mom told me it was fine. She said you would never check. I just needed a boost to get started. Please, Natalie, do not send me to prison. I will do anything. The conference room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. The weeping of my sister and the shallow, panicked breathing of my mother filled the space. Richard sat frozen, a spectator watching his family burn to the ground. They expected me to yield. They expected the tears to trigger my lifelong habit of rescuing them from their own disasters. I kept my hands folded neatly on the desk. My expression remained an impenetrable wall of corporate detachment. I looked at the three individuals who had thrown my diploma in the trash, who had demanded my unemployment checks, who had branded me a jealous failure to the neighborhood. I am not here to offer forgiveness. I stated, slicing through the sound of Jessica crying. I am here to dictate the terms of your survival. I opened my own folder and pulled out a fresh stack of legal contracts. I unscrewed the cap of my fountain pen and placed it deliberately in the center of the mahogany table. The trap had closed perfectly. The raw materials were gathered. It was time to build the new foundation. The heavy brass fountain pen rested perfectly in the center of the mahogany conference table. The polished metal reflected the overhead lighting, acting as a visual anchor in a room suffocating under the weight of sudden accountability. My father stared at the writing instrument as if it were a venomous reptile. My mother continued to weep softly into a tissue. My younger sister sat frozen, her posture rigid with fresh terror. I did not rush the moment. In the realm of high-stakes negotiations, silence is a potent solvent. It dissolves false confidence and strips away rehearsed defenses. I let the reality of federal mail fraud and felony identity theft marinate in their minds for a full 60 seconds. David Bennett sat beside me, organizing the fresh stack of legal contracts. His presence provided a clinical boundary, ensuring the upcoming exchange remained grounded in statutory law rather than familial dysfunction. I slid the first document forward. This is a binding promissory note. I began, ensuring my enunciation was slow and precise. It acknowledges your collective responsibility for the $14,000 debt incurred on the fraudulent credit line. It outlines a strict repayment schedule extending over the next 36 months. The interest rate is fixed at 19%, matching the standard penalty rate of the original issuer. Susan looked up, her mascara smudged beneath her lower lashes. 19%, she gasped, her voice trembling. Natalie, we cannot afford that premium on top of our existing budget. Your budget is no longer my concern, I replied smoothly. You have two options regarding this specific theft. You can sign this document and assume legal liability for the stolen funds. Or I can instruct David to submit the prepared affidavit to the local authorities and the federal postal inspector. Jessica will face criminal charges for forging my signature. You and Richard will face accessory charges for intercepting the mailed statements. Jessica let out a sharp, frightened sob. Mom, just sign it, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please, I cannot go to jail. I have a brand. I ignored my sister and maintained eye contact with my father. Richard possessed a stubborn streak, a lingering desire to retain some fragment of his patriarchal authority. I needed to extinguish that instinct permanently. The promissory note is merely the first requirement. I continued, tapping the second contract. This is a restructured deed of trust agreement for the Marietta property. As the sole proprietor of Morgan Capital, I am offering you a chance to remain in the house. However, the terms reflect your status as high-risk borrowers. Richard leaned forward, his jaw tight. What are the terms? The monthly payment increases by 30% to account for current market risk, I stated. You will submit a certified cashier check to David's office by the 5th day of every month. There is no grace period. If you miss 2 consecutive payments, this contract contains an accelerated eviction clause. Morgan Capital will execute an immediate foreclosure. You will have 72 hours to vacate the premises. The blood drained from Richard's face. 30%. Natalie, I am on a fixed pension. We cannot absorb that kind of increase. We will lose the house within 6 months. Then I suggest you find secondary streams of income, I answered. Perhaps you could cancel the premium cable package. Perhaps Susan could resign from her remaining social clubs. You told me at the diner that I needed to secure a new position to cover your household emergencies. I am simply returning that excellent advice. The cold arithmetic of the situation finally broke through Susan's carefully curated country club facade. The realization that she was losing her social standing, her financial safety net, and her maternal dominance all in one afternoon triggered a desperate psychological pivot. She abandoned the strategy of denial and deployed the oldest weapon in the parental arsenal: guilt. Susan stood up from her leather chair. Her hands shook as she planted them on the mahogany table. "How can you do this to us?" Susan cried, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I carried you. I stayed awake for countless nights when you were a sick infant hovering over your crib. I sacrificed my own youth to ensure you had a roof over your head and warm clothes on your back. You owe us a baseline of respect for simply bringing you into this world." She expected the emotional outburst to paralyze me. She thought reminding me of my childhood vulnerabilities would soften the terms of their surrender. I remained seated, resting my hands on the leather armrests of my chair. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband pack my winter coats into a cardboard box just 7 days prior. "Providing food and shelter to an infant is the minimum legal requirement of parenthood," I responded quietly. "Basic biology does not grant you a lifetime license for financial exploitation. You do not get to steal my identity and mortgage my future because you fulfilled your basic obligations 20 years ago. The debt of my childhood has been paid in full. I bought your heating unit. I funded your tennis lessons. I paid for the luxury vehicle Jessica used to pretend she was successful. You drained the well dry." Susan stared at me, her mouth open, searching for a rebuttal that did not exist. The emotional manipulation bounced off the invisible shield I had constructed around my psyche. "Sign the documents," I instructed, gesturing toward the brass fountain pen, "or leave this office and wait for the police to arrive. The choice is yours." The ensuing silence was heavy, saturated with the bitter taste of total defeat. Richard slowly reached across the table. His hand trembled as his fingers wrapped around the brass barrel of the pen. He pulled the promissory note toward his chest. He did not read the dense legal typography. He simply flipped to the final page and scratched his signature on the designated line. He slid the contract to Susan. She signed her name, while wiping fresh tears from her cheeks. Jessica was the last to hold the pen, her signature erratic, and rushed eager to escape the immediate threat of federal prosecution. They repeated the process for the restructured deed of trust. Every stroke of the pen legally dismantled their entitlement. Every signature cemented my absolute leverage. When the final document was executed, Richard placed the pen back in the center of the table. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, the vibrant arrogance of his suburban kingdom reduced to ash. David Bennett collected the signed contracts, reviewing the ink with professional scrutiny. "Everything appears in order." David confirmed, sliding the papers into his leather portfolio. "We will mail a certified copy of the payment schedule to your residence by Wednesday." Richard stood up slowly, pushing his chair back. He did not look at me. "Let us go," he muttered to his wife and youngest daughter. They gathered their belongings in a state of profound shock. Susan clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. Jessica kept her head down, pulling the hood of her cotton sweatshirt over her hair. They walked out of the conference room, traversing the plush carpet of the legal firm, stepping into the elevator bank that would carry them back down to their new reality. I watched the glass doors swing shut behind them. I remained at the head of the table, feeling the quiet hum of the downtown traffic vibrating through the floorboards. "You handled that with remarkable precision," David noted, taking his seat. "I have witnessed hostile corporate takeovers that featured more emotional volatility than what just occurred in this room." "It was a necessary correction," I replied, staring out at the cityscape. "They relied on a flawed business model." I gathered my own purse and thanked David for his impeccable counsel. I rode a separate elevator down to the lobby, stepping out into the warm, bright Monday morning. I hailed a private car service to return to Buckhead. The conflict within the legal office had concluded precisely according to my projections. However, the execution of those contracts guaranteed a fierce secondary reaction. Stripping away their unearned capital meant they could no longer afford the luxury of unified denial. A family structured around exploiting one specific member will inevitably turn on itself when that target is removed from the ecosystem. My smartphone vibrated against the leather seat of the car just as I crossed the city limits. A text message notification illuminated the screen. It was not from my father, nor was it a desperate plea from my mother. It was a brief update from Aunt Diane sent just moments after Richard and Susan returned to the Marietta driveway. The message contained 2 short sentences outlining a shift in the domestic hierarchy that I had anticipated since the morning they evicted me. The consequences of the new financial constraints were already fracturing their loyalties. The true cost of my sister losing her golden child status was about to unfold, and the battleground had officially shifted to the interior of the brick split-level house. The private town car glided seamlessly down Peachtree Road, carrying me away from the downtown legal district and back toward the quiet elevation of my penthouse. The leather interior smelled of expensive, detailing a stark contrast to the suffocating tension I had just left behind in David Bennett's conference room. I held my smartphone in my lap. The screen illuminated with a text message from Aunt Diane. I tapped the notification, opening the brief dispatch that signaled the beginning of the end for the Morgan family hierarchy. "The honeymoon is over," Diane wrote. "Your father just handed Jessica the local classified section." I locked the screen and watched the city blocks roll past the tinted windows. In any parasitic ecosystem, a profound crisis occurs the moment the primary host detaches. For decades, Richard and Susan had operated under the delusion that their financial mismanagement was a temporary season of bad luck. They used my income as a permanent shield against the consequences of their actions. With that shield permanently shattered, they were forced to face the raw mathematical reality of their survival. The 30% penalty increase on the restructured deed of trust required immediate liquid capital. They could no longer afford the luxury of pampering their youngest daughter. Since childhood, Jessica had occupied the role of the fragile prodigy. She was shielded from the mundane struggles of adult responsibility. When she dropped out of her university communications program, Susan baked cookies and blamed the professors. When she failed to secure traditional employment, Richard praised her entrepreneurial spirit for starting a generic wellness page on the internet. They cultivated her entitlement, funding her illusions with my stolen credit and my coerced bank drafts. But a severely delinquent mortgage note changes the chemical composition of a household. According to the intelligence Diane gathered later that evening, the drive back to the Marietta suburbs was a silent, grim procession. The moment Richard parked his outdated sedan in the driveway, the fractured domestic dynamic imploded. Jessica immediately retreated to her new yoga studio, the bedroom they had callously evicted me from just 1 week prior. She expected to hide under the covers and wait for her parents to fix the disaster. Richard did not offer comfort. He did not knock on the bedroom door. He pushed it open, carrying the heavy burden of his bruised ego and his impending financial ruin. He stood in the center of the room, looking at the expensive ring lights and the mirrored wall panels Jessica had purchased using my fraudulent credit line. He delivered an ultimatum that effectively destroyed her golden child status. Rent was now due, $600 payable on the first of every month, plus a 33% share of all utility invoices. Jessica reacted with her standard arsenal. She wept. She threw a tantrum. She reminded her father that she was a budding influencer experiencing a temporary setback due to her cruel older sister. She expected Richard to cave, to pull her into a hug, and promise they would figure it out together. But Richard was no longer a proud patriarch securing his legacy. He was a terrified tenant staring down the barrel of a 72-hour eviction clause. The fear of homelessness superseded his desire to coddle his favorite child. He told her the tears would not pay the mortgage. He informed her that if she could not produce the required capital by the end of the month, she would be packing her designer activewear into cardboard boxes, just like her older sibling. The harsh dose of reality forced Jessica into a modern job market she was entirely unprepared to navigate. Her resume consisted of sporadic social media posts and a fraudulent holistic certification. Corporate firms ignored her applications. Boutique fitness studios required actual experience. Desperation pushed her toward the only industry hiring unskilled labor with immediate start dates. By Wednesday morning, Jessica Morgan was officially employed as a fulfillment associate at a sprawling regional logistics warehouse located off Interstate 285. The transition was brutal. The facility was a cavernous concrete structure filled with towering steel racks, deafening conveyor belts, and strict productivity quotas. Instead of filming morning meditation routines in premium leggings, Jessica was required to wear steel-toed boots and a high-visibility safety vest. Her shift commenced at 5 in the morning and concluded 10 hours later. She spent her days scanning barcodes, lifting heavy cardboard parcels, and walking an average of 12 miles per shift across the unforgiving warehouse floor. Her carefully curated social life crumbled instantly. Without the pristine luxury sport utility vehicle, she was forced to rely on public transit or beg Susan for rides in the aging family sedan. The impromptu spa days vanished. The organic juice cleanses were replaced by hastily packed sandwiches consumed in a bleak employee break room that smelled of corrugated cardboard and exhaust fumes. Her digital followers quickly noticed the silence on her profile. The illusion of the successful, independent wellness guru dissolved, leaving behind an exhausted young woman trapped in the grinding gears of the working class. The irony was exquisite. She had demanded my bedroom to build an empire, but she was now too physically devastated at the end of her warehouse shifts to even look in the mirrors. While Jessica was learning the true value of $1 on the concrete floor, Susan was experiencing a catastrophic social downfall of her own design. The Marietta Country Club operated on a strict hierarchy of invisible wealth and flawless reputations. Membership was a privilege maintained through prompt payment of dues and adherence to suburban decorum. When I deleted the recurring bank draft for her monthly fees, I severed her primary social artery. The first day of the month arrived with ruthless punctuality. The club accounting office attempted to process the scheduled transaction. The request was denied due to insufficient funds. A polite, discreet email was dispatched to Susan's inbox requesting updated payment information. Susan panicked. She possessed no liquid cash reserves. She could not ask Richard for the money. His entire pension was now diverted toward the inflated mortgage payment and the 19% interest rate on the fraudulent credit card repayment plan. Facing the imminent threat of a public suspension, Susan chose the only route that offered a shred of dignity. She drafted a hasty resignation letter to the club board of directors. She cited a sudden desire to step back from social obligations to focus on family healing and spiritual growth. It was a poorly constructed lie, and the neighborhood wives saw right through the transparent facade. The gossip network mobilized with devastating efficiency. The same women who had offered digital prayers for Susan during her online smear campaign against me were now tearing her reputation apart over afternoon cocktails. Dave from across the street shared the story of the repo man towing Jessica's car. Another neighbor noticed Jessica wearing a warehouse uniform while waiting for a rideshare at dawn. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together. The Morgan family was not the victim of a jealous older daughter. They were a bankrupt household drowning in their own deceit. Susan was effectively ostracized. The invitations to exclusive garden luncheons ceased. The casual waves from passing luxury vehicles disappeared. She was trapped inside the brick split-level house, her social armor shattered, forced to sit in the quiet ruins of the affluent image she had spent decades curating. Diane informed me that Susan spent her afternoons obsessively cleaning the granite countertops, trying to assert control over a microscopic domain, while her larger world collapsed. I observed their collective downfall from the quiet elevation of my Buckhead penthouse. I did not feel vindictive joy. I did not celebrate their misery. I simply felt the profound, enduring satisfaction of a balanced equation. For 6 years they had utilized my labor to purchase comfort they did not earn. Now the natural order was restored. They were finally bearing the weight of their own existence. The weeks progressed, the crisp autumn air replacing the lingering summer heat across the Georgia landscape. My transition away from the corporate firm was complete. My schedule belonged entirely to me. I spent my mornings running along the paved trails of the city parks and my afternoons managing a diverse portfolio of fresh investments. The ambient anxiety that used to govern my pulse was a distant memory. However, the definitive test of my new boundary was rapidly approaching. The calendar turned to the first week of November. The deadline stipulated in the restructured deed of trust was looming. Richard was contractually obligated to deliver a certified cashier check to David Bennett's office by the 5th day of the month. The payment represented the inflated market interest rate, a severe financial hurdle for a household relying on a fixed pension and warehouse wages. If the courier did not arrive by the close of business on the 5th day, the terms of the contract were clear. There was no grace period. There were no extensions granted for unexpected household emergencies or sudden illness. The 72-hour accelerated eviction clause would trigger automatically. I sat at my marble desk on the morning of the 4th, reviewing a quarterly prospectus for a new software venture. The penthouse was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control system. My smartphone rested near my keyboard, its screen dark. The Morgan family had remained entirely silent since walking out of the downtown legal office. They had not attempted to contact me. They had not begged for a reprieve. They were either pooling their meager resources to survive the month, or they were preparing to call my bluff testing whether their eldest daughter possessed the clinical detachment required to render them homeless. The answer would arrive by tomorrow afternoon, and it would dictate the final chapter of our shared history. November 5th arrived with a frigid rain washing over the Buckhead skyline. The downpour obscured the horizon, painting the city in shades of gray and charcoal. I sat at my marble desk watching the digital clock on my monitor roll over to 3 in the afternoon. 2 hours remained before the traditional banking window closed. If the courier did not deliver the certified cashier check to the downtown legal office by 5:00, the accelerated eviction clause embedded in the restructured deed of trust would activate. I did not feel anxious. I was merely an observer waiting for a mathematical outcome. At 10 minutes past 3, my smartphone illuminated. An encrypted email notification appeared on the locked screen. The sender was David Bennett. The subject line read Morgan Capital Escrow Fulfillment. I swiped the glass surface and opened the secure message. The body of the email contained a high-resolution scanned image of a certified bank draft. The numerical value printed across the center of the document was precise, covering the inflated market interest rate for the property and the first required installment of the identity fraud restitution. Below the scanned image, David had forwarded a brief correspondence from my father. Richard had sent a message directly to the law firm inbox. The email contained exactly 2 words: payment sent. There was no formal greeting. There was no apology for forging my signature on a credit application, nor was there any expression of remorse for the brutal confrontation at the diner. It was a stiff transactional confirmation from a man who only recognized authority when it carried a severe financial penalty. I archived the email and locked my phone. The defensive perimeter I had engineered was now a permanent load-bearing structure. Richard and Susan had undoubtedly scrambled to gather those funds. I envisioned them liquidating whatever modest retirement portfolios they still possessed, or perhaps selling the antique furniture Susan cherished to pawnbrokers across the county line. Jessica's warehouse wages were likely confiscated the moment her direct deposit cleared her exhausting manual labor, diverted to keep a roof over her head. They had tested the boundary hoping I would falter, and realized I possessed the clinical detachment necessary to render them homeless. They blinked. The predator had officially become the compliant debtor. The weeks bled into the holiday season. The Georgia landscape shifted from vibrant autumn foliage to a barren, austere winter. Back in the Marietta suburbs, the consequences of their actions settled into a grim, unyielding routine. Aunt Diane provided sparse, objective updates during our occasional telephone calls. She confirmed that the new financial reality had fundamentally altered their daily existence. Richard secured a part-time retail position at a local hardware supplier to supplement his fixed pension. The man who used to boast about his golf handicap was now spending his weekends wearing a poly-blend vest, directing contractors toward the plumbing aisle. Susan learned to navigate the aisles of discount grocery franchises. Her country club aesthetic was replaced by practical faded garments, her social calendar entirely empty. Jessica endured the brutal peak season at the logistics warehouse. While her former peers were purchasing gifts and attending festive gatherings, she was mandated to work mandatory overtime scanning barcodes and loading heavy freight during the relentless holiday rush. Her digital footprint remained dormant. The wellness influencer persona was dead buried under the weight of steel-toed boots and a rigid time clock. I spent the final Thursday of November inside my penthouse. Thanksgiving is a holiday traditionally weaponized by manipulative relatives. It is a day designed around forced proximity and performative gratitude, an environment where toxic dynamics are often swept under a rug of roasted poultry and seasonal decorations. I chose to spend the day entirely alone. I declined invitations from former colleagues and politely bypassed community events. I did not crave the chaotic noise of a crowded dining room. I ordered an exceptional meal from a premier catering service plating the food on fine porcelain. I spent the afternoon reviewing the architecture of an intricate algorithmic software program I was developing for a private client. The solitude was not a punishment, it was a luxury I had earned. Early in the evening, the sun dipped below the cityscape, casting long, dark shadows across the hardwood floors of my residence. I walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of imported Pinot Noir. The cork popped with a satisfying resonance. As the dark red liquid filled the crystal glass, my phone vibrated against the marble island. The screen displayed a text message notification from Susan. I picked up the device. I did not feel the familiar sickening drop in my stomach that used to accompany her communications. My pulse remained steady. I opened the message thread. It was a carefully crafted paragraph designed to extract maximum emotional leverage. "Thinking of you today, Natalie," Susan wrote. "The table feels so empty without you here. It breaks my heart that our family is fractured over such a silly misunderstanding. I hope you find it in your heart to forgive us and come home for Christmas. We miss the way things used to be." I read the words while holding the cool crystal stem of my wine glass. The psychology embedded in her text was transparent. She did not miss her eldest daughter. She missed the convenience of my routing number. She missed the era when she could steal my identity without facing a 19% penalty rate. The phrase "silly misunderstanding" was a calculated insult. It erased the deliberate, sustained theft. It minimized the moment my father publicly disowned me. It reduced a calculated campaign of financial exploitation into a minor disagreement. She was offering a bridge back to the old dynamic provided I was willing to pretend the abuse never occurred. A younger version of myself would have drafted a furious, multi-paragraph reply. I would have outlined their exact crimes, citing the dates of the fraudulent charges, and quoting Richard's exact insults from the diner. I would have allowed the adrenaline to ruin my peaceful evening, engaging in a pointless war of words with a woman incapable of self-reflection. But standing in the pristine silence of my kitchen, I monitored my own internal response. I felt nothing. The anger that had fueled my initial strategy was gone. The sorrow over losing the family I thought I possessed was entirely depleted. I did not hate my mother, nor did I wish further harm upon my father or sister. I simply viewed them as external liabilities that had been successfully mitigated. The opposite of love is not hatred, it is profound, absolute indifference. I tapped the screen and deleted the message. I did not block her contact information, nor did I type a response. Leaving the channel open but unacknowledged demonstrated a level of sovereign control she could not penetrate. A blocked number indicates fear. Silence indicates a total lack of relevance. I set the phone back on the counter and carried my wine into the living room. The Morgan family only understood one dialect. It was not compassion, it was not loyalty, and it was certainly not familial duty. It was leverage. The threat of an accelerated eviction clause accomplished what decades of obedience and unreciprocated generosity could never achieve. They complied with the repayment schedule because the alternative was the destruction of their shelter. Enforcing strict, uncompromising consequences was the only language that registered in their minds. December arrived with the biting chill. The fifth day of the month brought another encrypted email from David Bennett. A second certified cashier check had been delivered to the downtown law office. The amount was exact. The payment was punctual. The routine established a cold, permanent boundary. January mirrored December. February followed the same precise pattern. The dramatic confrontations were over. The smear campaigns had failed. The chaotic siege on my lobby was a distant memory. The conflict slowly diffused into a quiet administrative procedure handled by my legal counsel. My family was reduced to a monthly line item on a ledger, their existence quantified by a bank draft that slowly repaid the debt they owed. I did not check their social media profiles. I did not inquire about Jessica warehouse shifts or Richard retail schedule. Their daily struggles were no longer my burden to carry or my crisis to solve. The deadbolt on my life was locked, and the mechanism was unyielding. As the calendar shifted toward the spring, the final remnants of my past life faded away. The penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a true home. I had survived the extraction process. I had amputated the diseased limb and cauterized the wound with legal contracts and financial leverage. The journey had required a clinical ruthlessness I never knew I possessed, but it was the only methodology capable of breaking the cycle. I found myself standing on the balcony one crisp morning, breathing in the fresh air, preparing to survey the empire I had protected. The quiet after the storm is a rare and valuable commodity, and I intended to savor every single second of the peace I had secured. The morning sun breached the horizon, casting a brilliant golden hue across the glass facades of the Atlanta skyline. I stood on the terrace of my Buckhead penthouse, gripping the smooth metal railing. The air carried the crisp, promising scent of early spring, a sharp contrast to the suffocating humidity that defined my previous life in the suburbs. Concrete towers pierced the clouds, standing as monuments to industry ambition and ruthless efficiency. From this altitude, the city resembled a massive complex circuit board, pulsing with energy and capital. I breathed in deeply, feeling the cool wind against my face. The absolute silence of my sanctuary was a hard-earned luxury purchased through months of strategic warfare and unwavering discipline. The winter had passed without further incident. The monthly certified cashier checks arrived at David Bennett office with mechanical precision. Every envelope represented a fraction of my stolen identity restored, and every cleared bank draft served as a reminder of the permanent boundary I had constructed. The dramatic screaming matches and the manipulative text messages had ceased entirely. My relatives realized that their emotional weapons were utterly useless against a creditor who possessed zero emotional vulnerabilities. They were trapped in a compliance loop, forced to surrender their meager wages to maintain their fragile grip on a heavily mortgaged reality. However, a sudden disruption tested the durability of my resolve during the second week of April. A handwritten letter arrived via traditional postal delivery. The return address belonged to Aunt Diane. I opened the envelope while standing at my marble kitchen island, expecting another routine update regarding my sister's grueling warehouse schedule. Instead, the cursive script detailed a fresh crisis. Richard had collapsed while stocking heavy bags of concrete at the local hardware store. The emergency room physicians diagnosed a stress-induced cardiac episode, a direct physiological response to working retail hours while carrying a massive high-interest debt burden. He was resting at home, but his medical invoices were compounding rapidly. The inherent conflict of the situation presented a familiar, insidious trap. The societal expectation ingrained in every American child whispers that you must rush to the bedside of an ailing parent regardless of their past transgressions. Blood is supposed to supersede all boundaries. The old version of Natalie Morgan would have driven straight to the hospital, paid the medical deductibles, and absorbed their anxiety. I set the letter down on the granite surface. A memory materialized in my mind. I was 22 years old, suffering from a severe case of bacterial pneumonia. I possessed no health insurance, having just graduated from university. When I asked Susan to help me cover a $100 urgent care copayment, she sighed heavily. complaining that my illness was cutting into her seasonal country club wardrobe budget. She handed me a $20 bill and told me to buy over-the-counter medicine. The realization crystallized within my chest, clear and unyielding. Helping without boundaries is not generosity. It is servitude. Sacrificing your own financial and mental stability to rescue individuals who view you as a disposable utility is a profound betrayal of your own worth. I did not purchase their distressed debt to be vindictive. I bought the mortgage to definitively rewrite the rules of a rigged game, a game they had rigged against me since my adolescence. I filed the letter in a drawer. I did not send flowers. I did not wire funds. I maintained the quarantine. 3 days later, the final unexpected conflict of this entire saga materialized on my computer screen. David Bennett requested an urgent video conference. I initiated the secure connection, observing my attorney sitting behind his polished mahogany desk. He did not possess his usual calm demeanor. He appeared visibly energized. He informed me that a massive commercial real estate conglomerate was aggressively acquiring residential parcels in Marietta. They intended to level a massive suburban tract to construct a sprawling mixed-use luxury development. The developers encountered a problem. They needed to secure a continuous block of land, and a specific brick split-level house sat directly in the center of their proposed architectural footprint. They ran the property title and discovered Morgan Capital Holding Company possessed the deed of trust. They bypassed the occupants entirely and submitted a direct, unconditional buyout offer to my firm. David transmitted the digital proposal to my monitor. I reviewed the numbers. The commercial developer was offering an astronomical premium, nearly double the current market valuation of the property, paid in liquid cash, pending an immediate closure. The decision placed the ultimate power of fate squarely in my hands. If I rejected the offer, my parents and sister would continue their miserable, grinding existence, paying me 30% above market rates until the end of their days. It was a perfectly designed prison. If I accepted the commercial proposal, I would liquidate the asset entirely. The conglomerate would assume immediate ownership of the land. Under the corporate transition laws of the state, the new developers would issue a mandatory 30-day notice to vacate to all current residents. The split-level house would be demolished by bulldozers before the end of the summer. Richard, Susan, and Jessica would be thrust into the brutal, hyperinflated rental market with ruined credit scores and zero equity. I looked at the soaring skyscrapers through my penthouse windows. The American dream is ultimately a transaction. Wealth is generated by recognizing the exact moment to exit an investment. My family had treated our relationship as a ruthless business arrangement for a decade. It was only fitting that their final chapter concluded with a corporate buyout. Accept the offer, I instructed David. Execute the transfer of the deed. Are you certain? David asked, his professional tone masking a hint of astonishment. Once the ink dries, you relinquish all control over their living situation. The developers will not offer them a lease extension. They will evict them immediately. I am absolutely certain, I replied. They are no longer my tenants. They are an obsolete asset. Cash us out. The transaction closed 48 hours later. The wire transfer hit my primary banking portfolio, representing a staggering return on my initial distressed debt investment. My final act of administrative warfare was complete. I was officially untethered from the Marietta property and the toxic bloodline that occupied it. The conclusion of this story brings us to a profound revelation. I did not hoard the massive profits from the real estate sale, nor did I integrate the monthly fraud restitution payments into my personal wealth. I contacted a specialized philanthropic attorney and established an irrevocable charitable trust. Every single dollar extracted from my abusive family was diverted into a foundation designed to provide emergency microloans and legal counsel for young women attempting to escape financially coercive households. I weaponized my parents' greed to fund the liberation of countless strangers. I stepped back from the terrace railing, letting the warm breeze sweep through my hair. The journey from a discarded daughter crying in her childhood bedroom to a chief executive orchestrating a multi-million-dollar real estate divestment was grueling, but it forged an unbreakable resilience within my spirit. Before we part ways, I want to address you directly. If you are listening to this story and recognizing the subtle, exhausting patterns of financial manipulation in your own life, you must understand a critical truth. Loyalty is a beautiful concept, but when it is demanded by those who refuse to protect you, it becomes a chain. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when that person holds the matches. It requires a terrifying amount of courage to lock the door on the people who raised you. Society will judge you. Relatives will condemn you. They will call you selfish, bitter, and ungrateful. Let them talk. Their opinions hold absolutely zero currency in the reality you are building for yourself. Your peace of mind is your most valuable asset, and you must guard it with the ferocity of a corporate titan protecting a hostile takeover. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to Elderly Stories. Tell me in the comments what was the exact moment you realized you had to set a hard boundary in your own life. I walked back inside my penthouse, the sliding glass door sealing quietly behind me. The city hummed with endless possibility. I was no longer a human ATM machine. I was no longer an emotional punching bag. I was a completely free, self-made woman, and my ledger was finally perfectly balanced. We are raised on a very specific version of the American dream. It is a narrative wrapped in pristine suburban lawns, crowded holiday dining tables, and the unwavering cultural belief that family is the ultimate unbreakable sanctuary. We are taught from a young age that blood is thicker than water, that loyalty is the highest of virtues, and that you must inevitably sacrifice your own comfort for the ones who gave you life. But what happens when that sanctuary morphs into a syndicate? What happens when the people who are supposed to protect your heart view your success not as a point of pride, but as a limitless reservoir to fund their own reckless delusions? Natalie's story is much more than a gripping tale of corporate maneuvers or financial retribution. It is a profound, unflinching reflection on the hidden costs of the American family dynamic. Her journey exposes a painful reality that many of us recognize but rarely have the courage to say out loud. Helping without boundaries is not generosity, it is servitude. For nearly a decade, Natalie played the role of the dutiful daughter, silently subsidizing the affluent facade her parents so desperately needed to project to the neighborhood. She bought into the societal expectation that her intrinsic worth was tethered to her financial utility. She paid the overdue bills, she floated the auto loans, and she kept the heavy engine of their suburban illusion running. But the very moment her income supposedly vanished, her value to them evaporated instantly. The image of her framed university diploma, the symbol of her hard work and intellect, tossed carelessly into a trash can to make room for her sister's vanity project, is a devastating metaphor for anyone who has ever felt reduced to a mere transaction by the people they love most. The core lesson embedded in the Atlanta skyline is about the radical, terrifying courage required to reclaim your own ledger. In American culture, we heavily idolize the self-made individual, but we almost never discuss the emotional amputations that are often required to achieve that independence. Natalie did not merely purchase a distressed mortgage, she purchased her own emancipation. She recognized that the only way to survive a rigged game is to stop playing by the abuser's rules. She utilized the cold, objective reality of legal contracts and financial leverage because it was the only dialect her family was willing to understand. It is a difficult, bitter pill to swallow. We desperately want to believe that love can eventually conquer greed, and that endless patience will one day yield a tearful cinematic apology. But Natalie's reality reflects a harder, much more necessary truth. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is turning the lock on the deadbolt. It is realizing that you do not owe anyone your peace of mind, your financial security, or your future, not even the people who share your last name. If Natalie's journey resonates with the silent battles you are currently fighting, or if you have ever had to make the agonizing choice between saving yourself and going down with a sinking family ship, we invite you to become part of our community. Please hit the like button, subscribe to Elderly Stories, and share your own experiences in the comments below. We are dedicated to building a space where these difficult, necessary truths are finally brought into the light. At the end of the day, when the legal documents are signed, the debts are collected, and the noise of the neighborhood gossip finally fades into nothing, you are left standing alone in the quiet architecture of the life you have built. Natalie looked out over the sprawling city surrounded by a silence she had paid dearly to achieve. The air up there is thin and the initial isolation can feel vast. But as you look out the window of your own life, tracing the boundaries you've had to draw to survive, you have to ask yourself, is the quietness of the room a symptom of loneliness? Or is it simply the unfamiliar, echoing sound of being completely, unapologetically free?